Martha, it was the White House Easter egg roll today.
It certainly was. What a spectacle.
I was not familiar with the concept of an Easter egg roll until I came to Washington. It's not something you eat.
No, I did think it was a type of spring roll. It's a bit like the cheese roll phenomenon in the UK. Do you know the cheese roll that they do?
Not known far beyond Somerset and the whole egg roll thing. It is an Easter egg event at the White House. I actually went last year, and it's great. It's a great fun day out for all the family if you are lucky enough to get tickets. But today it was consumed by all things Pete Hegseth, which we'll be getting into today.
I'm Martha Kelner.
And I'm Mark Stone, and this is day 93 of Trump 100, a day when all attention really has been on the death of Pope Francis, and Donald Trump has confirmed that he will be heading to Rome to attend his funeral.
But first, is Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth on thin ice after details of a second group chat in which he shared sensitive military information?
President Trump has spent the day defending his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, after a New York Times report suggested that Mr. Hegseth had shared sensitive military information in a group chat, which sounds a little familiar.
It certainly does. Just to be clear, this isn't the Signal group chat that the Atlantic journalist Jeffrey Goldberg was added to, where
Yeah.
Hegseth, in case anyone forgot, shared information about a strike on Houthi rebels in Yemen. This is another group chat that included his wife and his brother. It is almost laughable. This time, the group chat took place on his private personal phone, just to add a little extra spice to the situation. He appears to have posted similar information about the strike in this other group at around the same time, but details of this second group have only just emerged over the weekend.
Yeah, the group was called Defense/Team Huddle, and it included people in Hegseth's close personal circle, including his wife, his brother, and his personal lawyer, people who had clearly no need to know about these strikes. Now, our partners at NBC are reporting that Hegseth was warned by an aide not to divulge sensitive information in that group, like he might need to be reminded of that, but he did it anyway.
Yeah, and Hegseth forced to defend his position. We mentioned it earlier, that same White House egg roll event. Presumably, he didn't expect to be talking about this.
Do you have anything you want to say, sir, about the signal chat controversy?
What a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of
What
lies.
about comments from John
And
Miller?
on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me.
Yeah, for me, the amusing thing as he was defending himself there was the faces of his children who were standing next to him. And he sort of looked over to them one point and talked about, well, he was serving the nation for his kids' future and all that sort of thing. And they looked completely bemused. But anyway, he was blaming the leak on a quote bunch of leakers who get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out. That is a reference to several people in his inner circle who were fired over the last couple of weeks for allegedly leaking information to the media. And they really were close to Hegseth as well. Dan Caldwell was a senior advisor. Darren Selnick was deputy chief of staff. Both these men have been very close to Hegseth for about a decade, well before he entered politics. So he's blaming disgruntled former employees, and there are clearly a few of those around at the moment. Um, but they may have a story to tell, or maybe they've got an axe to grind. It's possible, of course, that all these things are true. You can be a leaker, you can be disgruntled, and the things that you're leaking can also be true.
And I guess the nub of the issue is that the White House, Pete Hegseth himself, nobody is denying that this story is true, that he was having these discussions on his private phone with his wife and his brother. One of those disgruntled former employees that he presumably was referencing is a man named John Ulliott. Until recently, he was a Pentagon spokesperson. Mr. Ulliott wrote an op ed in Politico over the weekend, an astonishing piece of writing in which he described what he said was total chaos at the Pentagon under Hegseth's leadership. He calls it the month from hell working for him. He said it's hard to see how the defense secretary remains in the job for much longer. He also says he believes more bombshell stories on Hegseth are coming in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, and the thing about Mr. Elliott is that he firmly believes in Donald Trump's politics, and he was recommending that Pete Hegseth should become the defense secretary, and yet he has decided to pen this piece. These are his words. It's an opinion piece in Politico, and it is devastating about, as you say, this month of total chaos. And for me, like, this isn't any government department. It's the Pentagon. It is it is the largest government department, not in America, but in the world. And
Mhm.
it wields such extraordinary power. So you've got to be quite worried when the Pentagon is in a sense of disarray. Those that have just left jobs there say it is. About what's going on in that department and the dangers or the unintended consequences that could follow of such a critical department in a state of, as he says, total chaos.
I think there are a couple of key reasons why Donald Trump, at least publicly at the moment, is still backing Pete Hegseth. I think firstly, because Trump and his aides, they don't want to be seen to be bending to the will, in their words, of the liberal media, and also because they invested an awful lot of energy and political capital in getting Hegseth appointed to the role in the first place. His confirmation was not straightforward. Many people thought he was uh, ill equipped to be the defense secretary. And it has to be said, he's proven so far that perhaps he isn't qualified to be in this job. And certainly, if a uniformed officer, someone in a lower position than Pete Hegseth, had been caught doing what he'd done on two occasions, using those signal group chats in that way, they'd be gone by now.
The other thing I often wonder whether actually sometimes a crisis like this for Donald Trump is kind of useful because it keeps one thing in the headlines while many other things may be going on
Yeah.
behind the scenes that people aren't focusing on. I was talking to a friend at the weekend, and he pointed out to me the story about Albrego Garcia, the guy who was deported to El Salvador. Uh, and he said, look, controversial story, of course, but it is so useful for Trump because all you guys, he was talking to me, in the media were doing last week was focusing on that story. Meanwhile,
Mhm.
this, and this were happening. And,
Yeah.
he had a point. He had a point. Now, talking of one story dominating, there has, of course, just been one headline over the past 24 hours. That is the death of the Pope on Monday morning. And President Trump had this to say at the Easter egg roll at the White House.
I just signed an executive order putting the flags of our country, all of them, all federal flags and state flags, at half-mast in honor of Pope Francis. So he was a good man, worked hard. He loved the world, and it's an honor to do that.
It was slightly bizarre, wasn't it, seeing the US president addressing the death of the Pope while standing next to someone dressed as the Easter Bunny. Donald Trump, while his words were warm about Pope Francis, they didn't seem particularly tailored to the man. He said about him, good guy, works hard. It felt a little bit like he could have been talking about the local mechanic. And, Trump hasn't always spoken so warmly about the Pope. During the 2016 election, I'm sure people will remember, Pope Francis criticised then candidate Trump's pledge to build a wall on the border with Mexico. He said it wasn't Christian. Trump shot back at that. He called the Pope's comments disgraceful, said that if the Vatican was ever, quote, attacked by ISIS, the Pope would have only wished and prayed that Donald Trump would have been president. So it's not been a straightforward relationship.
Yeah, it hasn't. But Trump did visit the Vatican a year later. He went, and that, of course, produced those pictures of Trump beaming while Pope Francis looked rather stern.
Today that he had their backing during the most recent election campaign, meaning presumably he had the backing of the Catholic Church. But it's fair to say that it's been a hot and cold relationship. They've publicly clashed a number of times since that 2017 meeting, most recently ahead of the 2024 election, when Pope Francis said US Catholics should consider migration policies as well as abortion when heading to the ballot box. And, the role of the Pope is definitely a political role in the modern era, and Donald Trump knows that, and he knows how to use that to his advantage.
Yeah, and the Pope, of course, does have political influence. Certainly in America, about a fifth of Americans identify as Catholic, and crucially, they're pretty evenly split politically, according to research done by Pew. 52% of Catholics vote Republican, and about 44% Democrat. So they're clearly a very important voting bloc to win over, and that's why, as you and James were discussing, I think it was on Saturday's episode, that Donald Trump has made a real effort to appeal to Christians, both during the election campaign and during these first 100 days of his second term. It's become, I think, an overtly Christian White House, which is kind of, interesting, given that Donald Trump, many might argue that a lot of what Donald Trump stands for isn't necessarily, certainly doesn't align with the sort of the kindness and hope that Pope Francis has preached during his papacy. Vice President J.D. Vance, though, well, he was remarkably one of the last officials to see the Pope. He was at the Vatican this weekend. And I think that for him will be a poignant moment that he was there so close to the end of the Pope's life.
We mentioned earlier that Donald Trump will be in Rome for the Pope's funeral. He'll be accompanied by the First Lady, Melania Trump, who is Catholic. That's expected to take place this coming weekend. Interesting as well to follow, who will be appointed as the next pope and whether the issue of abortion will remain the crucial issue in that relationship between the Vatican and the United States, or whether because abortion has now been devolved as an issue to the states, whether other issues like migration, like climate change, how the poor are treated, whether they will come to the forefront as the main issues between the states and the Vatican.
Now, then, what else before we go?
Yeah, a couple of other things on the agenda today. Firstly, Harvard University is suing the Trump administration over his threats to pull federal funding. This is a major escalation of the ongoing fight between a number of major universities here in the US and President Trump, who's accused them of enabling anti Semitism on campuses and teaching racial diversity and gender ideology that goes against his diversity, equity, and inclusion crackdowns. This is particularly interesting because Harvard is incredibly wealthy. They have deep pockets to pursue this case, to fight President Trump.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers of some of these Ivy League universities and how much money they've got. It's huge. I mean, Harvard has an endowment worth some $50 billion, which is why the Trump administration says it shouldn't be getting any federal funding for anything, whether it be for important research projects or anything else. I think the challenge for these universities is that these endowments are quite hard to dip into. They're not just like bank accounts. So it is a massive challenge for universities as they fight Trump for money that they believe they deserve.
Yeah,
Speaking of money, the markets have slumped again, Martha. I don't know if you saw today. It's amazing
yeah.
how quickly they react to whatever it is that Trump says, either in real life or on his Truth Social page. He's continuing to attack the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. He called him today a major loser. And as he did, the markets slumped. Remember, it was the market bond sell off, which is said to have spooked Trump a few weeks ago into his 90-day tariff pause. Now, all this comes as finance ministers, including the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves, arrive in Washington for the spring meetings of both the IMF and the World Bank. Incidentally, Martha, the World Bank and the IMF have been keeping quite a low profile of late, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting. Both of them have their headquarters in DC. They rely on significant amounts of funding from the United States, but they are also globalist institutions with, some might say, bloaty reputations. And I think they have feared that they sit perfectly in the sights of one Elon Musk. And should Donald Trump suddenly get interested in what these institutions are up to, then they could find themselves in the firing line.
Yeah, not keeping her head down is the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem. Bad Easter weekend for her. She was out enjoying Easter dinner with her family in a burger restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C., when her bag was stolen. Now, according to reports, it contained her passport, department security bag, and $3,000 in cash. Why so
Is
much cash? You might
Why so
ask.
much cash, but how on earth did it get stolen as well? I mean, that is just beggars belief.
It really
Surely there
does.
would have been Secret Service around her at the other tables. He might have noticed someone wandering up and picking it up. Bizarre.
Yeah, it's not a great look for the head of US security to get their bag nicked in a burger restaurant.
But why so much money, Martha?
Well, the spokesperson a spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security says she was using the withdrawal to treat her family to dinner activities and Easter gifts. Um,
Wow.
are you spending $3,000 on Easter eggs, Mark?
Absolutely not. How the other half live.
That's all we've got time for today, anyway. Thank you for joining us for day 93 of Trump 100. Remember, you can email us on trump100@sky.uk. Send us your questions for our question and answer at the weekend.
And if you're not already, do follow Trump 100 as well. You can do it for free wherever you listen.
But for now, that's it, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 94.
See you then. Bye bye.
Bye bye.